Thank you for joining us today for this session on the white paper. We're pleased to have you join us, and while we're waiting for more people to arrive, I'll cover some housekeeping points. This session is being recorded and we've shared the action plan ahead of the session. We'll also upload it into the chat function shortly. All of these slides and the links will be sent out afterwards. We're hoping to get those out to you at the beginning of next week. The event is CPD accredited. If you would like a certificate, please give us consent to share your data with the awarding body in the survey that will pop up as you leave the session. I'd really like this session to be as interactive as we can make it, so we'd welcome your thoughts about the subject during the session. We're going to open the chat function later, and hopefully you'll be able to add comments about your thoughts and learnings over the last couple of days. And before we start, we'd like to thank the IET for sponsoring this event. Without their support, we would not have been able to run these 2 days, so many thanks to the Institute of Engineering and Technology. So, to begin, welcome to the last session of our conference. We'll be creating an action plan around the white paper. My name is Hannah Stolton and I'm the CEO of Governors for Schools. I'm also a chair of governors at a primary school in Essex, and I'm joined today by my colleague Ashley.
Hi everybody, my name is Ashley Callard. I'm the Communications and Engagement Manager here at Governors for Schools, and I'm Vice Chair of a primary school in North West Durham.
Thanks Ashley. As you'll know, the Education White Paper was published in March and set out the government's intentions for the future of education. They were an excellent teacher for every child, high standards of curriculum, behaviour and attendance, targeted support for every child who needs it, a stronger and fairer school system. Before we begin, it's important to note that the subsequent schools bill has stalled in its journey to fruition, so you'll have heard that over the last 2 days, I'm sure, if you weren't already aware. Despite this, we're running this session as the key themes of the paper are relevant to governors no matter where we are on that journey, so we still wanted to run this session. You'll see the link to the white paper there, but hopefully you have had a chance to sort of make yourself aware of it previously. So for today's session, we'll be looking at the following themes from the white paper: recruitment and retention, the new curriculum body, school behaviour and attendance, falling behind and levelling up, and academisation. And as you'll know, if you have been to previous sessions over the last 2 days, we've covered some of those over the time. As you'll see, if you have the action plan downloaded, the key themes run across the top of the table. And this is what I'm asking you to reflect on today, what you need to know about each of these areas, in particular in regards to your own school setting. So here's the copy of the action plan. I have created one in advance. You'll see the greyed out text is sort of my ideas, but hopefully Raheem's managed to put into our chat function a blank copy as well as the one with text in. You can download it straight away if you haven't already, or just grab a paper and pen and you can make notes as we go along. We're really hoping, as I said, this is an opportunity for some thinking time for you and a chance to reflect on next steps for your board. If you've had a chance to attend the earlier sessions, then I'm sure that you'll have things coming to mind already. As you see, as well as pulling out those key themes, we have 4 points for each of these topics. So we've got the knowledge check here. That will be something I've completed in advance, and in a second we'll go through each area to make sure you're aware of what the white paper actually says. We've got questions to ask. There's some examples in there about what I'm thinking about asking at my next meeting, but this is the bit that you should add too. So questions you're thinking about that are relevant for your board and your school. We've got actions to take. Here's a space to list what your board needs to do, what the next steps of conversations might be, for example. And finally, there's the other notes section, which is a space for you to add any notes and things to remind yourself of later. Hopefully that's clear, and you can either use the blank version or my version as a starter for 10. So let's start with recruitment and retention. If this is of particular interest to you, we did hold a session on this earlier today. The white paper sets out that 500,000 teacher training and development opportunities will be available by 2024, that there will be a national professional qualification in leading literacy and also one in early years leadership. I didn't put on there the one in leading behaviour and culture too. There'll be £180 million of funding for early years training, And as I'm sure you're aware, the starting salary for teachers is expected to go up to 30,000. So thinking about your school in particular, what are the current issues that you're facing? Are you fully staffed? Do you have, do you know how many of your staff are early in their career or heading for retirement? Do you have people who are on the upper pay scale? Have you considered whether there are ways to retain your staff? Do you have any succession plans in place if you do know that people are retiring? Thinking about the MPQs and the CPD offering available, do you have teachers that are already identified who want to take up these MPQs? And of course, funding is an issue. I know as a school, we budgeted 3% for teacher salary increases, and it doesn't look like that's enough. So thinking about that sort of side of things too. And just wanted to put in there a finding from a recent or an earlier this year survey by the NASUWT that 7 out of 10 teachers are saying that they're looking to leave the profession in the next 5 years. What could the potential impact there be? So moving on to your action plan, I'll give you a couple of minutes to jot down any notes in the recruitment and retention column. Really welcome any comments in the chat about what your key questions are to ask, so we can share sort of knowledge and understanding and thoughts amongst the governor community. Ashley, do we have any comments in the chat?
So I'll be jumping in at this point and emceeing the chat side of things. So please do share your comments. It would be great for us all to learn from each other and be able to network in this way. So just looking in at the chat now, we've opened it up, and what we should be able to do shortly is able to post your comments. And one I'd like to start off with from a recruitment and retention perspective specifically is around kind of knowledge. From our perspective in the school that I'm a governor at, we seem to have a bit of a challenge in terms of recruitment from a non-teaching staff perspective. So for me, one of the things I would be looking at is this something that's happening this year? Was last year a blip, or is this an ongoing challenge? And it looks like we have some people in the chat as well writing some questions. So let's see what our audience today would like to share. We've got some questions around progression routes, and are these progression routes available for staff and schools? Probably a really interesting one for delegates on the call to think about is what is available in your school specifically from a progression route. Thinking both from a teaching staff perspective, but also non-teaching staff. I know it can be quite a challenge, particularly if you're in a role that is a salaried role and there isn't progression. What do staff do who want to progress, who want to get a higher salary bracket? Is there any opportunities in school for us to be able to do that? One of the questions that we've got from Siobhan is around barriers to retention. So I think looking at what the barriers that your school particularly are facing when it comes to retention is a really sensible suggestion. It's also important to note that those barriers are not necessarily going to be regionally specific. So if your delegates come from different parts of the country, difficult to say a one-size-fits-all approach, but I'd think about your local area as well and what the barriers might be within your specific geographic area.
I think we had earlier today when we were talking about recruitment and retention, one of the ideas that came out was that if you're sitting within a multi-academy trust and there is opportunities for teachers to sort of move to another school, and that offers potentially a chance for progression. So a sort of positive, the previous day we'd had a concern around teachers moving between schools and whether they would be forced to, but actually that this could be a positive, and there's ways of progressing a teacher's career, giving them more experience, different experience, while retaining them as well.
Really good point from Jennifer coming in around succession planning. Again, linking back to a session we had earlier on today, but one question you could be thinking about asking your board is, do we have a succession plan? Another question coming in from Elaine around flexible working. I think this could be applicable to lots of people on the chat today as well, I imagine, Hannah.
Yeah, definitely. And one that came up earlier too. Okay, we'll move on because we have got 5 to get through. So the next section that we wanted to look at was the new curriculum body. So the white paper sets out that there will be a new curriculum body working with teachers to create free, optional, adaptable digital curriculum resources. And obviously this is linked to the Oak Academy resources that were created during COVID. I think one of the things to think about here is that obviously schools have just fairly recently completed a curriculum review, which was led by Ofsted. So maybe as a school you want to be, as a board you want to be thinking about how that recent curriculum review has gone, how these additional resources will impact on workload. Obviously they're there to try and support good workload for teachers, or to reduce workload for teachers. So do you see that working well? And do staff already use curriculum resources that are available out there? I mean, there are plenty of resources, and we talked earlier about sharing those resources and how that can help with workload. So is that something that your staff are already tapping into? How are they sharing knowledge with other schools potentially? So again, we'll run again. If you would like to add any comments in the chat about the new curriculum, that new curriculum offering around online resources that maybe you want to take back to your school. So one of my key questions was around budget, really. If there are free resources going to be available, this could be a positive thing for our budget. If we're already paying for resources that are available online at the moment, will this help with that?
There's some chats coming in from delegates looking at the different labels for areas of learnings and some concern around some of the terms. Be interesting to see if other delegates on the call have got a similar experience.
Okay.
In IT infrastructure is coming up as well. I think that might be a really useful question for governors to ask. Do we have that IT infrastructure ready?
Yes, being in a village primary school where the Wi-Fi is not great all the time, sometimes these online resources sound wonderful, but actually in practice aren't as good as you'd hope.
Another one around making sure that resources are adapted and fit the curriculum and context. And again, please do share any comments you'd like all delegates to hear in the chat, and we'll be happy to read them out. We've got questions. Is it a good idea to be using third-party organisations for resources?
So I think many schools do, don't they? You know, especially with the recent curriculum review, how depending on different subjects. I know with our computing curriculum we were less confident, so we actually brought in a curriculum and adapted it to meet our needs, and that seems to have worked really well, rather than starting from scratch and reinventing the wheel. I think there is an element of schools reinventing the wheel sometimes, whereas actually they can tap into resources that are already available, and hopefully that does have a positive impact on teacher workload.
One question around the accessibility for learners with SEND needs, and I think that's really important for delegates on the call to think about too.
Okay, moving on. So the third section is around school behaviour and attendance. So the white paper lays out that there will be a richer, longer average school week, making the most effective use of time in school to ensure that children enjoy a rounded education, that there will be better behaviour and higher attendance through more effective use of data, and that there will be an annual behaviour survey and national data system. So I guess some of the things to think about is that richer, longer average school week was 32.5 hours. Has your school already got a 32.5-hour week? Is that something that you've implemented for September this year? And how is that time being used effectively? So if you have increased your school week for September, which I know we have, what are we actually doing with that extra time to make sure that it's actually benefiting the children to enjoy that rounded education? The 32.5-hour week, of course, is not just study time, so it does encompass all of the time that they spend in school, core time that they spend in school. Behaviour, how do you know what behaviour is like in your school? Is it just what the head teacher tells you, or are you hearing from other stakeholders? Do you run parent surveys, pupil voice surveys? You know, how are you hearing about behaviour? Is there a focus in your monitoring visits? How are you making sure that you're really triangulating the information that you get at the moment? And how will data from other schools help you, I suppose, in monitoring that data? Regarding attendance, we just had an attendance session this afternoon, which was really interesting. What strategies are you currently using to increase attendance? If anybody's got a silver bullet, please do share, because it is a problem for many schools. what else can you do? And yeah, if you do have a particular interest in attendance, then please do watch back that session. And just linking back to that National Professional Qualification in Leading Behaviour and Culture, which started in autumn, so it's now offered to teachers. So if behaviour is an issue for your school, or is something that you're focusing on, do you have teachers who maybe are taking on that NPQ at the moment? So an opportunity to write now on your action plan and note down any questions that you might want to ask. Please do add them into the chat.
Indeed. And I think a point that Hannah mentioned, just to echo again, is really important, is how are you scrutinising that data? Are you taking senior leadership teams' word as gospel, or are you looking at added sources of information? Quite a few comments coming in the chat now. I've got one from Liam around using school family link workers to look at persistent absentees. That's actually something that we have at our school, Liam, and I find it quite effective. So I'd be interested to see if that could be something that could support other listeners today. Looking at trends across year groups and across years, really good comment coming in as well. And I think interesting around days of the week as well, like are there particular days of the week, Friday and Monday, for example, you know, particularly common. Question coming in around specific community factors that are local to each school. I think that would be useful from a knowledge check perspective for delegates on the call today, is to think about that local context that you're in, things like public transport, distance lived from schools, cultural and faith communities, and planning around religious festivals to reduce the impact of absenteeism. Again, really good comments. Thank you for sharing, everybody.
One of the comments in the session earlier around that, which days do you have potentially more children absent from school, and arranging the curriculum around it. Actually, if children are motivated to come to school because they have art, and you have a day when maybe the attendance is not so good, is there a way of managing your curriculum to really encourage pupils to come to school on certain days? So that was quite an interesting one that I hadn't thought of and thought was quite useful. I also think around behaviour and attendance, reviewing the policies is probably key. I'm sure that's already on your agenda, but just in case it's not, just to make sure that your policies are meeting your needs, I guess, as a school.
One around parental engagement and raising awareness of the importance of good attendance. I think very important in terms of your knowledge check, but also your questions as what is happening with this? Do we do it? But also how? So lots of really good questions, Hannah.
Lovely. So now on to falling behind and levelling up. So to start off with falling behind, the white paper sets out that there's a parent pledge that schools will provide evidence-based support if a child falls behind in English and maths. There'll be up to 6 million tutoring courses by 2024. That'll be a mixture of one-to-one and small group tuition as a permanent feature of our school system, obviously started during COVID, but taking that forward. And an evidence-based approach to the education system supported by research from the Education Endowment Foundation. So we've just had Becky Francis, who is the CEO of the EF, speak about pupil premium in the session that we've just had prior to this one. So if you didn't watch that, please do check it out. There's so much information, and she shared a really great link to sort of a document that governors, specifically for governors, about what sort of data you should be looking at and how you can access that. Regarding the parent pledge, I think, what is your school's definition of falling behind? I think that's going to be key, is actually, what does it look like if a child falls behind? Is it that they're not making age-related expectations? Is it that they aren't making the required progress that you want them to make? You know, what does falls behind looks like? And I think also, as a knowledge check perspective, how is your school already communicating with parents in this instance? So is it waiting till parents' evening? Are they intervening earlier? Are they making parents aware of the situation? And how is that being managed currently? Obviously, regarding the tutoring, as I mentioned, this has started during COVID. Your school will have probably accessed some form of tutoring, and there may be questions around how that worked, how effective it was, how you'll take it forward how you will take it forward. Regarding levelling up, the white paper states that by 2030, 90% of children will leave primary school at the expected standard in reading, writing and maths. And just to give you a sort of understanding of that, a better understanding of that, in 2019, it was 65% of children achieving that standard. Obviously, the COVID pandemic has exacerbated those challenges, but yeah, so a way to go there. And for secondary school pupils, the idea is to have an increase in national GCSE average grade for both English language and maths from 4.5, which is where it was in 2019, to 5. So in old money, that's sort of a strong pass. So that grade 5 is a B/C, if you need that sort of translation. So thinking about your school in particular, what are your thoughts on these targets? How realistic does it feel? What's your school thinking about doing to make it happen if you're not there already? And how can we as governors support them to achieve those aspirational goals? If, you know, maybe you're in the happy situation of already being there, but if not, how are you going to support your school to get there? So a few minutes now to jot down any notes and to share your comments in the chat. Which we will open up. One of the things that I'd like to do is ask our English and Maths lead to come and present to our full governing board about what their challenges are, so we really hear it from them.
I think that's a really good point, Hannah, and I think linking into monitoring, I know it's been really difficult during COVID, certainly from my perspective, to be able to get into schools and be able to do some really effective monitoring. So now that we seem to be in a better position in terms of being able to get back together and be face to face, those types of things from a governance perspective hopefully will become a little bit easier across the sector for everyone to do. So hopefully combating that with additional monitoring will be very useful. We've got some comments coming in around the targets that you mentioned, Hannah, being particularly challenged, especially when you have high levels of SEN. So a little bit of concern around, is that achievable? And that might be a good question to bring up at board level with the rest of your delegates. Is this achievable? Do we forecast that we're going to have problems? And if we do, where can we go to get support? Are there people in our MAT, in our local authority that can support with kind of addressing these concerns that we have?
I think another problem is, especially if you're in a small school, we find that every pupil is sort of 3 or 4%. It can actually have one child leaving and another child joining can actually have a quite big impact on how many, what that percentage looks like. So that's always a concern for us as a school. It's actually how we're holding on to the pupils that we have had all the way through and actually tend to do well. So looking at our homegrown pupils, as it were, and seeing what their progress is.
I think another question that may be useful for governors to think about is catch-up funding, catch-up tutoring, and whether or not your school can access that. I know certainly where I'm from in County Durham, there's been a little bit of variety in terms of access to tutors and being able to get people to be able to fill those positions. So knowing kind of what your area is like in terms of tutors and whether or not your school kind of has that funding and can access that added support would be useful as well in terms of from your questions perspective.
I think one of the other things is looking at whether how you are looking at whether children are falling behind and leveling up, you know, thinking about that, whether it's progress, whether it's age-related expectations, how you're doing it, are pupils making that accelerated progress? Is that being shared with you as a governing board? How are you looking at that as a governing board? Do you have a committee who focuses on those particular areas? How are you making sure that all groups are being monitored? Yeah, maybe, I mean, I'm sure you're monitoring different groups of pupils and how they're progressing, but maybe really focusing in on certain groups might be useful.
Got another comment coming in around the data and what data is being prioritised. I think that could be a really good question and also an action point to put on your action plan if you're thinking of this area, is what data are we prioritising and how do we know that this is the data that is going to help us highlight whether or not we're doing well in this area, whether we need to invest a little bit more time or resource. So a really good suggestion. Thank you, Rebecca, for that one. Well, I think the chat is starting to quiet down, so should we move on?
Let's move on. So the final slide that we have here on the part of the action plan is the stronger, fairer school system. So we have laid out that all schools will be part of a strong multi-academy trust, or with plans to join or form one. So it's not that all schools will be in a multi-academy trust, but will be on that journey to join one or form one. that there will be investment in 55 education investment areas and 24 priority education investment areas. And there is also the statement that local authorities will be able to create multi-academy trusts moving forward. So I think some of the things to think about here is how you feel about this, how as a governing board you feel about this. Has your school started its journey on the multi-academy trust spectrum? Maybe you're already part of a multi-academy trust. Are you then aware of the trust plans for the future? Do you know what the trust plans are? Are they looking to grow? Are they already a reasonable size and actually maybe looking to stay the same? If you're in a single academy trust, what's next for you? Are you looking to maybe join another trust, whether that be a multi-academy trust or a single academy trust? Are you looking to add maintained schools to your trust? And if you're in a maintained school, like me, how have you started your conversations about joining an academy? Is that something that's been on your agenda recently? When was the last time that you did discuss that as a board? Have you started taking steps? We did have the session on academisation yesterday, so if you're in that situation, maybe you'd like to watch that back if you didn't already. So lots to think about there. I think if you're not aware whether you're in one of the education investment areas, probably a good thing to look at and see what funding is available, particularly for your school. Regarding the local authorities able to create multi-academy trusts, this doesn't mean that every every local authority is going to rush out and create a multi-academy trust for their maintained schools to join. The direction of travel is very much that there are lots of strong multi-academy trusts already out there, and there will be opportunities to join them, rather than local authorities just setting up trusts to sort of to mop up, as it were, the maintained schools that are still in the system. So a couple of minutes to jot down any notes now in this area. So thinking about where you are on your academy journey. I know for us, we've started the conversation, but we need to take further steps. We met with a couple of trusts, not sure whether they're right for us. Where are we going to go next? What trusts are there in our local area that we might want to explore? They're really interested to hear from people if they are on this journey already or have made this journey perhaps recently. It would be really interested to hear if you have made those steps already.
Quite a few people, Hannah, in the chat resonate with what you've mentioned around investigating and looking into different mats. A few people seeing a little bit nervous, difficult financial positions that schools are in. There's anxiety around whether or not that would kind of hinder those schools be able to become a mat, and would other mats want to take on a school that was in financial difficulty. A few questions around what to do if you join a mat but then you're not happy with that. Is there anything that you can do? So that's quite an interesting one in terms of when you're researching joining a mat, what would the process be? So making sure that you're doing your due diligence as you would anyway before you're joining. Got a few, one question, a very interesting one around schools being a small school, or other schools in the area maybe not wanting to join and kind of connect. So questions around what the local kind of appetite for academisation is in your area, and if there are any schools that have particular challenges, what is the local area doing to support those schools?
Okay, that may be where the local authorities step in, I guess, but there are options, that each area will have regional schools commissioners, or as it were, that can support schools with the journey into academisation. So that there are options out there. Don't think that this is you on your own. It is the governing board responsibility. Essentially, it shouldn't be left to the head teacher. It is part of your role. But I think don't feel that this is something that you need to do on your own. There are options out there. I know when we first started talking about it, we went to our local authority and asked them for advice, and they put us in touch with other schools, because they still have so many links with the schools that are in trusts. Just because those schools have moved to multi-academy trusts, they're still accessing a lot of the services provided by local authorities. So they gave us some great advice.
Some suggestions coming in for those who are already in a trust. Questions could be, how strong is our trust? How welcoming is our trust, and what can we do to support other schools who are taking part in this journey in our local area? I think that's a really nice one, in the spirit of collaboration.
Absolutely. Time is flying, I've just realised. So hopefully your action plan is now complete or getting there, and you'll have some questions to ask at forthcoming meetings. I'm not proposing that you cover all of this in your next meeting. Obviously, the next step is probably to prioritise your actions and create a timeline for when you want to cover each area. So a lot of the things that are laid out in the white paper is for 2030, remember. The staff salary increases for new teachers are coming into place sooner though. They've already gone up for this year and will be going up again in 23-24. And as I mentioned, those NPQs are already in place. So I'm just going to end up with thanking you for all attending this session and all of the other sessions over the last 2 days. We've been delighted with all of the conference sessions and hope that you've enjoyed them too. We will be sharing links to all of the sessions so that you can watch them back, even if you didn't register for them, and you can share them with your governing board and anybody else who might be interested. They're all freely available. Thank you very much to the Institute of Engineering and Technology who sponsored our event. We look forward to seeing you all at future GFS Governance of Schools webinars in the future. And I just want to end on thanking you all for everything that you do as governors. The time you give to the school system and the impact you have on thousands of pupils across the country is really, really appreciated. We couldn't do what we do without you. So thank you ever so much for all the time that you give. Have a lovely evening and we hope to see you soon. Thank you.